The next presentation is an oral presentation from Dr. James Deutsch, as outlined CMD 13M 51.56. Mr. Deutsch, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks for Ms. Levere rescheduling me, so I have to teach later this evening. So I think most of us here are fully in support of good union jobs, and also I think there's a concern around how occupational health actually works on the ground. So I'm teach at the Faculty of Medicine, and prior to my medical training, I worked with various radioisotopes as part of my PhD and postdoctoral work in biochemistry, which was in California. In the various laboratories in which I worked, I experienced firsthand how even the most educated and trained individuals can make careless mistakes. I live a fairly short bike ride downwind from the GE Hitachi plant, and one of my kids lives within several blocks. I'm extremely concerned, the more that I look at it, of disasters waiting to happen in or around the plant. A recent CNSC document on safety culture does not reassure me. I find parallels between the nuclear field and my own medicine in terms of the potential for industry influences on standards, measures, guidelines, and knowledge acquisition, as well as knowledge dissemination and transfer. Where does this culture of safety come from? And what qualifies the people who decide on the standards of determining what is, quote, safe and acceptable? Like the tobacco, pharmaceutical, and fossil fuel industries, the nuclear industries have refined the art of obscuring reality. The term, quote, normal background radiation obscures the fact that the newly created man-made radiation in reactors is in the form of new elements, many of which exert their toxic effect once they are incorporated into the tissues, organs, and cells of the organism. One nuclear reactor produces vastly more nuclear poison than was released by any of the nuclear bombs. Biological organisms can vastly concentrate these elements and hence their potential damaging effects. The race to produce fuel has left immense piles of uranium tailings which give new meaning to the singer Bob Dylan's Blowing in the Wind. But we humans evolved with most of the uranium in the ground safely away from our DNA. As people know, uranium emits alpha particles. It's relatively harmless outside the body. The industry loves to tell this one-sided part of the story. If inhaled or ingested, it is another story. These particles, 2 protons and 2 neutrons, can do major damage up close to DNA molecules, especially in women, children, and fetuses. There is still much to learn about the medical aspects of exposure to external and internal radiation. It's at an early stage. I was just at a conference a couple of weeks ago on recent advances in genetics. The science continues to reveal how extraordinarily complex the genetic and other cell mechanisms are. Recent discoveries regarding epigenetic and whole genome effects call for a fresh and urgent look. There is an increasing array of mechanisms, short and long term, and transgenerational, meaning that the effects may not even be detected for 1 or more generations subsequent to the initial exposure. So, when you look at workers or neighbors or whatever, you're not seeing the whole story. It's and it's a cross-section in time only that you're looking at. Increasingly, it's clear that not only cancer can result, often after years or decades, but also teratogenic effects, meaning birth defects, chromosome damage, and heritable diseases, along with a general increase in disease susceptibility. So this is another point, is a gradual weakening of the resistance of the general population to disease. So it's not a kind of you either have cancer or not. It seems that there's been an extra effort to magically undo this nuclear horror. Witness the glowing promises of atoms for peace and electricity for all, while minimizing the probabilities for things going wrong. It's like Russian roulette. There may be numerous barrels in the gun, but at least one of them does have a bullet in it. Why is there not open data on the numerous releases, accidents, and near catastrophes and health effects? Medical standards require full disclosure and informed consent. Reputable medical journals are now reporting the sequelae of Chernobyl, the reactor accident, and Fallujah, Iraq, where actual depleted uranium, uranium-238, was used in munitions. The illness and death from Fukushima won't be evident for years or decades, and yet people are saying that it's perfectly fine, nobody died. Any death is tragic, but in the case of the nuclear industry, what is being hidden is a potential for unimaginably massive catastrophes. Rather than probabilities and predictions, let us shift our focus from what might happen to what has actually happened at Sellafield, Hanford, Oak Ridge, Savannah River, Chalk River, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and on and on. The fact is that numerous trucks carry tons of uranium powder on the streets of Toronto to and from the plant. It sits right by the railroad tracks that carried the very same tank cars that exploded at Lac Mégantic. I had the privilege last week of meeting at City Hall with my city councillor and also some members of Toronto Public Health. It really brings up for me the question, to what degree our knowledge of basic science and physiological mechanisms can serve as a so-called red flag that would that would trigger an investigation or intervention by Toronto Public Health. From the information that I gathered, it's not entirely clear how the uranium powder is even transferred, and this is within the knowledge base of Toronto Public Health. It may be in sacks. These sacks may be in barrels, or it may be in barrels. There are very few details that I was hearing about the actual process, from the receiving of the uranium powder off the trucks through the various steps ending up in the ceramic pellets. I'm not sure if there has been a full accounting of made available to anyone of this process, and I would really like to ask Toronto Public Health to let this meeting know exactly what their knowledge is about this process. I know that there's a negative pressure room. I used to do chemical modifications of protein. One of them involved the old World War I nerve gas, and the stupid fume hood blew a fuse while I was doing it. Now, fortunately, I had my gas mask on, and I had a syringe of atropine in case I needed it. But, this was after much practice and, well into my training that this happened, and the fume hood blew a fuse. Now, we know about around here that we're getting more and more floods, microbursts, high wind and extreme weather events, power failures. This is going to become more of the norm than before. I was also told by Public Health that there is an open invitation for the public to visit. But, this is different from visiting, Toronto Public Health visiting unannounced to see what's happening at any given time. You can obviously clean the place up if there's going to be a scheduled visit, especially by members of the public. I also heard that the residents are satisfied and that there have been no concerns raised, and we know for a fact that that's very, very untrue. I heard that Toronto Public Health is comfortable with the results of the soil testing. I hear that there are 5 different stations that sample air around the plant, and I'm questioning why not have a sampler that's right in the stack. Wouldn't that be more of a measure of what's actually going out, at least in the air? I guess the other point that I'm hearing is that the regulatory and monitoring agencies such as the CNSC, the Ministry of Environment of the province, Toronto Public Health, they are not entirely arm's length from the process. This is becoming more and more clear to me just walking into community meetings. I'm seeing people have booths there. They're ready to answer questions. And I don't think it's in the line of answering questions from a concerned public, but rather it seems to be more directed towards reassuring the public just by their very presence even. And I think that if we look at regulatory agencies and standards from the UN and the IAEA and WHO that have arranged an arrangement to check in with each other before they come out with any concerns, on down right through all the various regulatory bodies, that they're not being questioned actively and aggressively by the protectors of public health of the citizens. It's just too possible for someone to be asleep at the switch, literally, as was the case with Lac Mégantic. So I'll finish with that. In my recent viewing of public information releases from the CNSC, I think they've done grave harm to their own reputation as a regulator and guardian of public safety recently by endorsing and publicizing a biased opinion piece in the New York Times, a highly distorted documentary film, Pandora's Promise, and actually criticizing the Toronto Star for an article covering a truck accident in the States involving nuclear materials. And we know that there have been more incidents since. So if the CNSC is in fact a watchdog, why is it more and more appearing as, so to speak, a lapdog of the industry? It's transparently declared itself to be a clearly pro-industry organization. Even their slogan, "Safety is in our DNA," is, I mean, it's a parody, actually. It's kind of a slip, what we would call a Freudian slip there, that in fact it's our DNA that is not safe. As we know that uranium binds directly and closely to the DNA. So there are innumerable jobs to be created in conservation, such as retrofitting of buildings, public transit, and badly needed infrastructure repairs. It's time to be not pro-nuclear but pro-health. And I'd just like to request, if I can, that Toronto Public Health clarify some of these questions around what is the exact process that goes on in the plant step by step, and that's really to look at what can go wrong. Because believe me, I worked in the labs for 10 years with radioactive material. I've seen just about everything go wrong that can. And the other part has to do with other studies and surveys of nuclear workers, maybe not at this GE plant, but elsewhere in other jurisdictions, including Peterborough. Thank you.
Thank you. Question? Question? Dr. McDill?
Not so much a question as a comment, and this is to GE. In your public information program, do you have a flow chart which shows from the arrival at your door to the exit the kinds of steps that the uranium goes through?
For the record, Paul Desiri. So on our website, there's a video of how pellets are made.
Does it go from the beginning to the end?
Paul Desiri, for the record. It summarizes the overall process.
If that's the one I've seen, it doesn't show it at all.
I think you can go and visit. I think they were doing now public tours, and you can go and actually see this stuff. I went right through this.
Not everybody has the luxury of time to do that, and also
well,
I'm not sure I want to.
If you want to know, you'll have to invest the time to go and look at it.
No, that's the job. That's the job of this company. They have a responsibility to the public. They're a corporation. They're one of the major global manufacturers of weaponry, including components of nuclear weapons. They're involved in the nuclear power industry. It's their responsibility to show transparently what goes on. I mean, this is nothing new. This is just one example. It's been very untransparent, very obscured, and I think that after a while people get tired of it. It takes so much effort. So that's, I think, what we've seen. But people are waking up.
Okay, thank you. Dr. McDill? Finished?
I'll ask the intervener a question then. Would a scientific type, but in regular language, flowchart be of assistance to you if the video is not? I haven't seen the video, to be honest. So
yeah, one of my daughters just ordered a cookbook. It's for professional chefs. That's what I'd like to see for the GE plant. It tells you step by step what you do and how. What are the ingredients? What do you do with them? What not to do? What to watch out for? All of that. It's not so hard.
Thank you. Anybody? Monsieur Hervé?
Maybe we could ask the staff to elaborate on the role of CNSC, because in his presentation, Mr. Deutsch mentioned about the pro-industry organization, talking about CNSC. So because of some reaction of CNSC in the papers or elsewhere, so could you explain what is the role and responsibilities?
I will also invite, in the meantime, if public health, the Toronto Public Health Agency want to come in and address some of the issues, feel free. Now's the time. Staff?
Sir Jima, for the record, the CNSC is an independent regulatory body. The allegations being made with respect to when we're trying to disseminate information, it's a requirement under the Act in order to disseminate information. In disseminating the information, some of the public is going to accept it as a dissemination of information, inviting the public to look at elements that we publish, or let it be a movie or an information session. But under the Act itself, we must disseminate scientific information and inform the public on the activity of the CNSC. So that's why on our website, we've got a variety of publications, from fact sheets, scientific papers, epidemiological studies. We heard about nuclear energy workers studies, uranium mine studies, radon progeny studies. So all these, the publication does exist. And the CNSC is the only independent regulatory body in the world that has the transparency that we are living today. The transparency that we lived in the DGR, where the public appears in front of the Commission and provide their opinion and the intervention. We are the only regulator in the world that has such practices. We are one of the regulators in the world that disseminates information by the Act and by the law. So the actions by the CNSC staff is independent. Our inspectors, my inspectors, can issue the order independently of myself or anybody. They have their own powers to do so. And the same thing is, the final decision lies with the Commission as an independent regulatory body.
Public Health?
Dr. Young Hoon, Toronto Public Health. I'm glad that Dr. Deutsch brought up this question, because I think it's important to point out that we are not the primary regulatory body for this site, or for this site and the regulatory body for nuclear facilities. And so under our legislation, which is the Health Protection and Promotion Act, under, I believe it's either Section 11 or Section 12, we are expected to work with the primary regulatory bodies, so that would be CNSC, MOE, in ensuring there is no public health impact. And so that is what we've done. And we've reviewed the data that's been provided by CNSC and MOE, and there's no indication that there's currently a health hazard to Toronto Public Health from this site, and that is what we're expected to do.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Can I reply to that briefly? So, I mean, my questions are really, to my distinguished colleagues, are really to what is the process? Where are the points where it can be spilled on the floor, where it can enter into the air? I understand that the workers, at least from the video I've seen, they're not wearing respirators or face masks. I mean, that's really a basic level of precaution. So the other thing, though, is around, if you look at the history of occupational health, I mean, who is occupational health for GE Hitachi workers? I'd like to know that. Who do they work for? Who pays them? And I think in terms of Toronto Public Health, is, you know, as I raised in the meeting last week, who makes these standards? Where do they come from? I mean, we have a vacuum in terms of leadership at the top these days, whether it's locally or internationally, in terms of conscientiousness and concern for individual people and their health.
If you read all the documents that were presented by staff and by Hitachi, the actual commission documents, if you read them?
I haven't read all of them.
Well,
but I've read your emails, and you know, you're promoting things.
You didn't read the actual documents that were presented by staff in Hitachi in terms of, and the Ministry of Environment and the measurement and all the data.
I've read a lot of them. Now, whether I've read 100%, no, I haven't. But I've skimmed a lot of them too, and I'm really looking very carefully as when I read a scientific publication in my field. I'm looking for evidence of bias, who funds it, what's the methodology. like I'll go right to the methodology. I'm not reassured by this. And, you know, frankly, promoting that documentary, Pandora's Promise, that is not within your purview of disseminating information.
We did not promote it. We just made it available to everybody who is interested.
What's the difference?
It says that it was actually put on CNN, and we pushed it on our mailing list. That's all.
Did you push other anti-nuclear?
Absolutely. All the interventions are now on the records. All on our records, on all proceedings, including yours.
What about the...
yours will be in the proceedings and online. Anybody can go and download it.
What about the Yellow Cake Trail?
Excuse me. Can we proceed with Commissioner asking questions? Anybody has any more questions? I got a question for you. What about nuclear medicine? Do you believe in nuclear medicine? You're an MD in the University of Toronto. What about nuclear medicine and all the isotope deployed thereof?
Oh, of course.
Of course, what?
Of course I believe in nuclear medicine.
But I mean, all the issues about every one of single DNA created by any one of those, every time we take CT scan using all of those things, aren't we faced with the same kind of risk?
Yeah, and that's why I think there's a significant overuse of CT scans. It has to be respected greatly in terms of the radiation to the body. I haven't had a dental x-ray in quite some time. I may regret it later on, but I know what it does. So it's at an absolute minimum. If it's a lifesaver, if it's necessary for a life-saving diagnosis, sure. But that's very different from workers being exposed every day and neighbors being exposed and all the poisons that you create with your industry.
Thank you. Any final word?
Well, the other thing is that there's no made in Canada on any of this uranium. It's mined on Indigenous land. You're trying to get it buried on Indigenous land, and it can go anywhere in the world. There's no label on there. There's no little barcode that tracks the uranium to see where it ends up in the world. That's pretty scary to me.
I don't know what you mean, but they are always, every exporting from Canada is to go through a very precise accounting for every atom of uranium.
Which they use in India.
You're wrong about that. That was way, way before all of us even existed.
It's part of history.
Your history. History that you want to believe. Okay, I think we've had enough of that. Thank you for your intervention.
So we will take a 1-hour dinner break. We'll resume at 7:30. I'd just like to know if Monsieur Fiori is in the room as our next presenter. If you are, please identify yourself to the reception desk. Thank you.